Okay, so today I will be sharing with you some interesting knowledge from Jataka 96, that is Telapatta Jātaka. Telapatta means oil bowl. Tela means oil, patta means bowl, so it's a bowl full of oil. So in the beginning of the story, during the Buddha's time, the Buddha is sharing with monks how it is important to be mindful. Basically, the Buddha here tries to encourage monks to actually be mindful at all times, and he is specifically focusing on mindfulness of the body. All right, so in Theravada Buddhism, when we talk about mindfulness, we often talk about the so-called four foundations of mindfulness, namely mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mental states, and mindfulness of various phenomena. We have 14 different practices that are called mindfulness of the body. Okay, we have two different practices called mindfulness of feelings, one practice of observing 16 mental states, and then we have 5 different practices of observing diverse phenomena. So out of these 14 different practices of observing the body, the Buddha here is specifically focusing on the practice of observing the 32 parts of the body as 4 elements. So these are actually 2 different practices, 32 parts of the body and 4 elements. So observing each part of the body, such as hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, um, tendons, flesh, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, and so on. And the Buddha here is encouraging the monks to observe each of these parts with their respective element. And we recognize 4 elements: hardness, heaviness, cohesion, temperature, and motion. And the benefit of observing these 4 elements is, of course, ultimately achievement of enlightenment. But on the way, especially for a monk, it is the ability to actually stay being a monk. That means the ability to avoid becoming infatuated with a lady and therefore avoiding to become a layperson, to stay with a lady that the monk can see. Okay, so the Buddha here is providing an interesting simile explaining, suppose that there is a beautiful lady in the, let's say, published English translation of this commentary. The lady is called the Belle. Belle in French means beautiful. Okay, beautiful lady. Belle. It's a French word. Some English translations of the Pali text like to add words from different languages. That's what English people, especially scholars, were doing in the past, either from French or from Germany, a little bit from Italy, Italian, a little bit from Spanish, a little bit from other languages as well. So if you read a lot of old English translations of polytexts, you'll get used to that. And here the word belle is used. Belle means beautiful lady. So, or Janapata Kalyani is a Pali word. It means the best of the country. We could say the Miss, okay? The Miss, the lady who has won the beauty contest in the country. And so the Buddha suggests, so suppose that there's this lady, and whenever this lady comes out and she dances, crowds come around and they cheer on her, how she's beautiful. Or if she talks, or if she moves, or whatever she does, people are so much curious about what she's doing, and they're supporting her because she's so beautiful. Now, suppose that there is a thief, and the king says, "Okay, you know what, you thief, you will be now punished. You will take a bowl full of oil." Now, the picture doesn't really show it correctly. The bowl should be full all the way to the brim. So this is not correctly full. The Buddha speaks and the sub-commentary explains the bowl is completely full of oil right up to the brim. See, this one is not up to the brim, so this is not really full. So the Buddha says, so you will take a bowl full of oil all the way up to the brim, and there will be a warrior right behind you with a sword, and as soon as you spill a single drop, you lose your head. The warrior will cut it off. And then what will you do, monks? Says the Buddha. Suppose that you're supposed to actually go between this lady and the crowd as this warrior follows behind you. Will you then try to look at that lady? Will you then try to enjoy the sight of that lady like everybody else is? And the monks say, of course not. We would be very mindful. We would be so careful because there's somebody behind us. And if we are not careful about this bowl and we spill a little bit of oil, then we are dead. And so the point here is that basically having somebody behind us with a sword, waiting for a moment when we are not mindful, makes the practice easy. That's what the Buddha says. To make the practice easy. But in the reality, we have nobody behind us with a sword. We are not in the danger of losing our head if we somehow are not mindful. Okay? And that is the problem. But the Buddha encourages monks to actually act as if they did. Monks should act as if they did have a man with a sword waiting for their moment of non-mindfulness or mindlessness. The true challenge is to curb the passions and maintain mindfulness without the immediate threat of a sword, as the wise did in the past to win a kingdom. And here the Buddha is transitioning to share with the monks a story where being mindful, even without a man who's holding a sword and waiting to kill you, was not only helpful to survive, but also it was helpful to become a king of a kingdom. So long, long ago, the Buddha to be, so we are here talking about a past life of the Buddha to be was a prince. And he was not the senior, so the kingdom was not meant to be his kingdom soon. And there were Buddhas, here specifically Pacceka Buddhas. So in that time, there were Buddhas who were not able to teach the Buddha's teachings, but they were fully enlightened on their own. Okay, so they achieved enlightenment without a teacher, but they were not able to teach. And such Buddhas are called Pacceka Buddhas or silent Buddhas, or some translate it as private Buddhas because they achieve Buddhahood for themselves alone. So these Pacceka Buddhas, long, long ago, so not 2,500 years, we can think of millions of years ago, or at least hundreds of thousands of years ago for sure. And these Pacceka Buddhas, by the way, the very last Pacceka Buddha, I mean, the one closest to our era, was the one who passed right by the time that the Buddha to be Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama was born. Okay, we know from our scriptures, and I think this will be something like Dhatu Vamsa or one of these Sri Lankan chronicles. So we know that there was a silent Buddha, that the last silent Buddha lived 2,500 years ago. That one we know for sure. Or at least that's what's written in the Pali text. So Pacceka Buddhas, silent Buddhas, were visiting this kingdom and the palace, and the prince decided to visit them and ask them for help. Dear venerable masters, will I become a king in this kingdom soon? And they're like, no, you won't, because of course you have older brothers and they will be those who will become the king. You, however, if you travel far, far away to Taxila, some people know it as Takashila. It's also known as the university city. That's why in Burmese, when you speak about university, you call it Takato, which comes from the word Takasila, namely university. So Taxila, Takasila, would be the kingdom. At that time, that was a region, it was a kingdom, where you will become a king after 7 days. But there is a danger. On the way to that kingdom, there are ogres, specifically ogresses. We talked about ogre last week. Hopefully you remember. So there are ogres, or specifically ogresses, and they are hungry. They eat humans, and they will try to entice you. They will try to delude you that they are beautiful ladies. And as soon as you fall in love with them, then they'll let you enjoy a tiny bit, and then they kill you and eat you. They will devour you. And so the prince, the Buddha to be, he took from these Pacceka Buddhas, from the silent Buddhas, he took from them powerful protection. And that is a thread, a powerful protective thread. And here is a very interesting thing. Because this thread, protective thread, today you have probably heard of it. If you come from Sri Lanka, you have heard of it as spirit nool or parittanula, which means the thread of protection. And here, paritta also means a short recitation. So a short recitation that protects you from ghosts and from evil energies. And this spirit nool or protective thread is usually bound around your wrists. Okay, around your wrists. But we learn from this story that the protective thread for the Buddha to be, for the prince, was actually bound around his forehead. Around his forehead. So the original placement for the protective thread for Peritnul was actually the forehead, not the wrist. Since when started the monks to apply the Peritnul on the wrist? I don't know, but I find it very interesting. Additionally, the silent Buddhas chanted a chanting over sand. You heard well, sand. That's the kind of powder you find in the beach. So yes, indeed, sand. And this sand, where did the Buddha to be keep this sand? He kept it in his hair. He kept it in his hair. That's what's written in the commentary. So he kept sand in his hair and a thread around his forehead. And believe it or not, it worked. It indeed, in the end, protected him from the ogresses. But he had 5 friends who he rejected to follow with him, but they really wanted to follow with him. So he had 5 friends, and it seems these friends did not get the protective thread and the protective sand, and that's why, or also because of the lack of protection, uh, probably more importantly, and that's what the story wants to say, um, because of their greed, because of their lack of mindfulness, they saw these ogresses on the way. Look at that. First, they saw beautiful ladies, and the one who was inclined to beauty, he was left behind. He was eaten up. He was devoured by an ogress. And then the remaining 4, there were 5, now 4 because one is devoured. The remaining 4, they saw beautiful ladies who are singing. They were so much infatuated by the sound, by the beautiful music. So yet another one, eaten up. Then the ogresses prepared really awesome odor. That means smell. And again, one of the 3, now only 3, one of the 3 stayed behind. He was devoured by the ogresses. How does that happen? Well, he smells that odor and he's like, you know what, guys, continue. I'll stay here. I don't want to continue with you on the journey. I want to stay here with the ladies because I enjoy this pleasure. And then as he stays there and he's with the ladies, he enjoys tiny bit and then he is devoured, dead. And then they continue, now 2 of them, and they notice, oh, there's some very, very delicious food. And again, one of them stays back and he's killed, devoured. Finally, the last one of the 5 friends of the Buddha to be notices very pleasurable furniture. And he stays there and he enjoys and he's killed. And then you have the Buddha to be. Here we have a Buddha. It's not really accurate, but the Buddha to be a layperson continues on the journey alone. And at that time, one of the yakinis, one of the ogresses, follows behind the Buddha to be, and she tries to encourage him to actually fall in love with her, to become infatuated with her. But he doesn't become infatuated first because he is mindful, he's careful about his body. He's not necessarily careful about 32 parts of the body and each of them as four elements. Probably he doesn't know that technique yet, but he knows that she's an ogress because he saw this ogress devour his friends, kill them, make the blood flow. That's exactly what's written there. She made the blood flow and ate them. And so he knows that, he saw it, so he's scared. And he's correctly scared. In Buddhism, we actually appreciate if your fear is the right one. Okay? If the fear of death, of old age, illness, and death, if the fear of greed, hatred, ignorance is there, then that's actually the right fear. So fear actually is good, but it needs to be the right one. And so the so on the way somehow they meet hunters, and the hunters are wondering, why are you dragging this lady behind you? That means, why are you letting this lady to be there behind you without really um, appreciating her and being kind to her and whatever else. So she says, you know what? This is my husband, but that's what it is. And he says, no, that's not my wife. That's an ogress, and she ate five of my friends. And she says, you know what, guys? That's exactly what men do when they are angry. So instead of accepting the fact that she's a liar, she suggests that men, when they are angry, they call their wives ogresses. And that is also what is written in the text. So then the Buddha to be arrives at his destination, Taksila, or more accurately in Pali, Takasila. And there he finds a rest house and he is scared. Here we see that he's like meditating and whatever. Here we have the reminder that he had it's a little weird illustration, but whatever. He had this protective thread around his head, definitely not attached to the walls around. That's ridiculous. But he had the protective thread um, bound around his forehead, and the sand definitely not floating behind him, like in this picture again. That's hilarious. But he had it on his head. Okay. So then what happens is that somehow by his special power of being a Buddha to be, the ogress is not able to enter the rest house. So she's outside, and people, maybe through the windows, who knows, people who are around the king, they come to see this rest house because the king is going around and he's asking, who's this lady? Does she have a husband? We will commonly see in our scriptures that when a king sees a beautiful lady, the first question is, does this lady have a husband? Guess why? And so the people come up to the lady and they're like, so do you have a husband? And she's like, yes, of course, he's inside. And the Buddha to be says, no, that's not my wife. She's a yakini. She's an ogress who ate my companions, who devoured my five friends. And so the king learns what happened, and he's like, well, this lady is a royal treasure. She's not to be possessed by some ordinary gentleman. So I will take her as my chief consort, my chief wife, chief queen. So the king believes that she is so beautiful, and he takes her on the back of his elephant right away. We don't have the elephant here, but that's what he does. He makes her his chief queen, chief consort. And then the lady, the ogress, plots a trap because she's an ogress. She did not become a beautiful, um, kind, nice lady who cares about the king, not at all, because she's still the ogress. So as they come to the bed at night, she asks the king, you know what? She cries. You know what? I worry. All these ladies in this palace, they will be mocking me. They will be saying, oh, ha ha, you're a lady from the field. You're a lady from the road. Who knows who's your dad or mom? They will be mocking me, and I don't like that. So the king says, okay, whatever, I'll do whatever you want. And she's like, okay, you know what? Make me the absolutely powerful one over all of your kingdom. And the king says, no, I cannot make you powerful one over your kingdom. Even I am not that powerful over the kingdom. I need to I need to only punish whatever is the crime in the kingdom, but that's basically all my power. She says, okay, well, then make me powerful over this palace. And she's crying and pleading. And in the end, the king says, okay. So this way, the ogress has got all of the power over the palace. How did this happen that the ogresses can actually kill people when they have power over them? So it happened, and you maybe remember the king of ogres, Vessavana, from the last week. Last week we were talking about an ogre who was taking care of a lake or of a pond, and he was allowed by the king of ogres to the Vessavana, the god Vessavana, he was allowed to kill anyone who doesn't know what is a Deva Dhamma, what is a divine quality. And here again, the king of ogres, Vessavana, allowed all of these ogresses in that forest to eat, to devour anyone who is infatuated to them. Okay, but here the ogress somehow is not sure that everybody in the palace will be infatuated with her, so she is basically taking power over the people there and over the living beings there, so that through this power she has a kind of excuse that she can kill them and devour them. So as soon as she gets that permission, she goes to the forest back at night while the king is sleeping. She brings over her friends, and then with her friends, they all eat everybody in the palace, including the animals. Not even a dog survives. That's what's written in the texts. So what remains are bones. You can see here, bones remain. And the ladies, the ogresses, go happily back to the forest. Now, in the meantime, the Buddha to be is in the rest house, standing, afraid, scared, with a sword, ready that the ogress may enter, so he'll have to kill her. But that's not what happens. The ogress got the king, and now she's happy back in the forest with full stomach. And so the Buddha to be stays in the palace, stays in the rest house. And so the people, the next day, they find all those bones. They clean up the palace. They perfume it, make it beautiful. And then they realize, oh, what the Buddha to be said. Do you remember what he said? He clearly said, she's not my wife, she's a yakini who ate my companions. That's what he said. So they remember that he was restrained. He did not fall a prey. He did not become a prey to this woman. He's restrained, he's wise, he's careful. And that's what they like about him so much that they make him the king of their country. So that's how the Buddha to be the prince became the king of the country far, far away, Takkasila. All right. So now, what does the subcommentary tell us? So the subcommentary helps us understand some of the concepts in the story. And the first one are the similes, are the metaphors about the mind that is not mindful. So the Buddha talks about mind that is not mindful and encourages the monks to be mindful through the simile of the man with a sword following behind a man with a pot full of oil. And the three similes that we learned from the sub-commentaries are the mind like a pumpkin on a horseback. And here specifically round pumpkin. Maybe there are some pumpkins that are not round, who knows? But suppose you have a round pumpkin on a horseback. How balanced is the pumpkin? How long do you think the pumpkin stay on the horseback? Not long. And likewise, a mind that is not mindful, that is not concentrated, is easily lost from an object, for example, your breath, or the 32 parts of the body, or loving kindness. So when the mind is not sufficiently mindful, concentrated, it cannot focus for a long time on an object, like a pumpkin on a horseback. Likewise, a mind that is not mindful or concentrated is like a wooden stake in loose chaff. What is a chaff? Chaff is the peel, the skin of rice. Okay, so before you get a rice on your plate, first it had to be part of a plant. And when the rice is part of a plant, we call it paddy, P-A-D-D-Y, paddy. And this paddy needs to be chaffed. That means the peel, the cover of the rice needs to be removed. And this peel itself, that's called chaff, as far as I know. And suppose that you have this chaff, the pile of chaff, the pile of the paddy peel, and then you take a stick and you try to establish that stick in that chaff. Of course, the stick will not be stuck in there, it will just fall down. If you, for example, establish this stick in a firm ground, then of course that stick will stay and it will not fall. So the point here is that the mind that's not mindful or concentrated, when it is trying to be concentrated, it cannot, because it does not have the basis. And here I'd say that the basis, the foundation, is actually the practice, the habit. As you concentrate, as you're mindful, as you develop your mind gradually, you get the habit, you get the skill, such that the mind is concentrated and mindful whenever you want or always. So then the chaff of lack of habit to concentrate becomes a firm ground that allows the mind to be really stabilized and with the object where you want to have it. Or an untrained mind is like the flower on a bald head. Now, of course, ladies, they like to stick flowers in their hair, but here we are talking about a bald head. If you put a flower on a bald head, how long time do you think it will stay there? Not a long time. So likewise, the mind, when it is not trained, it will not stay for a long time with a meditation object. Or it will not stay a long time mindful, and it will be lost in thinking and in lust, in desire. And that's the main problem. Actually, the Buddha does not really seem to be criticizing thinking. Most often what the Buddha criticizes, as in meditation, is defilements. That means greed, hatred, ignorance. Even we have a Vitakka Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha says that when he was training to become a Buddha, he was actually distinguishing two kinds of thoughts. The skillful thoughts, non-greed, non-hatred, non-ignorance, or let's translate it into generosity, loving kindness, and mindfulness, and greed, hatred, ignorance. And when he had greed, hatred, ignorance, he would be very careful to avoid going into those thoughts. But when he had this generosity, loving kindness, and mindfulness thoughts, then he would actually grow these thoughts. That's what he said. So actually thoughts in meditation are okay, except that they need to be skillful thoughts, not unskillful thoughts. Okay, of course, you meditate to be concentrated on breath, so you'd better be with breath than thinking about generosity. But still, it seems that the Buddha does not necessarily criticize, or I am not aware of a case when the Buddha would criticize thinking about generosity, loving kindness, or mindfulness. So you do not have to always worry about thoughts. It's more about what kind of thoughts are there in the mind. So then the subcommentary provides us with some insight into what actually mind is. So mind is bodiless, asarirang, because it has no hardness, heaviness, no cohesion, no temperature, and no motion. Okay, the four elements of matter are not there in the mind. And um, they're called derived elements, upadaya rupa, which are commonly known as vanna gandha rasa oja, that means color, taste, color, smell, taste, and nutritive essence. They are also not there in the mind. Or, according to the ancient scriptures, five derived elements, upadaya rupa, actually means eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. Oh yeah, that's the original meaning of upadaya rupa. And again, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, as the physical senses, are not in the mind. The mind doesn't have them. The body does. Okay, so mind is bodiless. Sequential consciousness. So the subcommentary reminds us the mind actually is always, every time, only one moment that arises and passes. It specifically says that consciousness arises one by one in a specific sequence. That's what the ancient subcommentary says, and it's of course based on the commentary. We will find this mention, if I remember correctly, in the commentary to Satipatthana Sutta. So mind actually arises one by one. So how about the satta chitta sadharana? Sabba chitta sadharana. How about sabba chitta sadharana? How about these seven cetasikas which are always present with the consciousness? Okay, there are seven cetasikas. You maybe know, in Burmese you call them cetate. And these seven cetate or cetasikas are supposed to arise with every consciousness, chitta, or sate in Burmese. So how is that possible that every consciousness has seven cetasikas, but at the same time we say that there is always only one single consciousness at a time? Well, that is because these seven cetasikas, they always arise with the mind, but they do not necessarily arise exactly at the very same moment. Okay, so they arise around that consciousness. So we will see that better if we look at the chitta viti, at the process of the mind. So the process of the mind, which are arising passing moments, can be viewed as distinct sequences. And each of these sequences has a certain start and end. Of course, there are cases when the mind does not have sequences, such as when you are deep asleep. So then it's only arising passing bhavangas, arising passing moments of mind that maintain your existence. But when you are awake, the mind is following a certain sequence where the mind is ready for a sensual, let's say, sense object, such as seeing, such as the form, visible form, and then it is ready to accept that visible form, and then it comes into contact with the visible form, and then it processes the visible form, and then it makes some kind of evaluation of the physical form. And then it falls back into this idle state when it's just ready to accept another visible form or some other sense object. So within that period, within that sequence, we will see these seven cetasikas. Okay, but in fact, they are all just arising, passing, one mind. You never have 2 or 3 or 4 or let alone 8 minds at the same time arising. No, never. Grasping from afar. So the mind is able to think of things that are far away. That's all what that means. Straightening the mind. So now what to do? So if we really want to be mindful, and here the Buddha is suggesting to the monks to be mindful. So what's the process? So first, it's necessary to remove gross defilements. Ideally, living alone in a forest, cave, under a tree, and dealing really with the hatred, lust, ignorance. So these defilements, especially gross defilements, need to be removed. And here, the simile in the sub-commentary is given as debarking the staff, a stick, debarking the stick. So you take, it's a little weird, you would usually take a strong machete, or a very strong knife. You take the stick, and then you debark. You clean the stick with the machete or with the very good knife. And likewise, you need to remove the dirt from the mind as you work to improve your mindfulness. When that is done, or within, actually at the same time, you need to do the same thing, and all of these things at the same time. So you also need to develop your faith. So you're listening to the Buddha's teachings, you meet with many friends who follow the Buddha's teachings as well, and you listen, you talk, you get inspired, so you increase your faith. You apply spiritual energy. So as you meditate, you gain joy. The Buddha suggested that monks practice jhanas, deep level of meditation, so that they achieve joy. And that is the joy that will keep them from falling in love with a lady and therefore to stay a monk. Serenity and insight. So again, you apply concentration and insight, and that also helps you develop your mindfulness. And in the end, your mind becomes like an arrow, so sharp that you can point to the reality, to impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, and not miss them. If you then watch the present moment as impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, you can then target the truth. And as you target the truth, you then achieve the ultimate wisdom. What is the direction not gone to before? So the Buddha suggests that when monks meditate, their mind then goes in the direction of wisdom, or in the direction of nibbana. So the sub-commentaries then explain that the word direction can be metaphorical. It doesn't have to be northeast and so on. So they explain in accordance with the Singalovada Sutta from Dika Nikaya that there are parents, teachers, wife and children, friends and companions, servants and workers, and then ascetics, and these are all actually metaphorical directions. These are directions to which we have to bow, and that actually means we have to fulfill our duties towards these directions. Okay, we fulfill our duties to parents, teachers, wife, children, friends, companions, servants, workers, and ascetics and Brahmins. And then there is another direction, and that is Nibbana. And the sub-commentary explains Nibbana as something that can be seen. That means something that can be attained, achieved. That's why it is a direction, because the Pali word for direction is disa, and to see is dissati. So the sub-commentary suggests that the word dissati, to see, is somewhat etymologically related, or at least metaphorically related, to the word disa, the direction. So the journey towards Nibbana is here also shown as the metaphorical journey to the kingdom of Takasila. And on that journey towards Nibbana, towards enlightenment, if we can take the protection, that means apply mindfulness and concentration, associate with monks, associate with knowledgeable, skillful people, follow the Buddha's teachings, so that's our protection. If we can also maintain restraint and we do not become prey to what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, then we may in the end really arrive at the kingdom Takkasila, the kingdom of Dhamma, and there attain Nibbana. And that is all from me for you today. We still have 11 minutes, so I'm curious if you have any questions or anything you'd like to add to the lecture today. Okay, I see here in the comments that there is a lot of stuff. A lot of AI assistants today. How the beings without body learn the Buddha's teachings. I already actually answered that. This was a question from last week. So if you look into the summary, I wonder if Laura has access to our WhatsApp group. Laura, can you contact me in WhatsApp? This is my WhatsApp number. Anybody can contact me privately if you want. And you can contact me in WhatsApp and you can ask me to add you into the WhatsApp group. And that way you will have full access to the summaries. And there is already the answer written down. In brief, beings without body cannot actually get to learn the Buddha's teachings. And that's also the reason why Alaraka Alama. Do you know who was Alaraka Alama? No, not Alara Kalama, Asita Kala Devila, sorry. So Asita Kala Devila, that was the ascetic who was supported by the king Suddhodana at the time when the Buddha to be was born, when Siddhartha Gautama was born. And Asita Kala Devila then went up to the king and he said, "Oh, you have a newborn baby, right?" And the king then showed the baby to Asitakala Devila, and Asitakala Devila saw the baby, and then he was happy. He was so happy. And then he cried. So the king asked Asita, "Why are you happy? And then why are you crying?" And Asita says, "Well, you know, I know that Siddhartha will become the Buddha and he will teach the Dhamma to the world. And that is a very rare thing. So I'm happy. But then I realized that I achieved this state of neither perception nor non-perception. Neva sanya na sanyayatana. And because of this achievement, I will be born in the immaterial world, in the arupa world, after my death. And there is no matter. There is no way how I can listen to the Buddha's teachings. So by the time the Buddha will become the Buddha, I'll be there and I'll have no way to learn the Dhamma. And that's why I'm crying. So when you are born in the immaterial world and you have no body, then you cannot hear anything because the sound is part of matter. It's the is the consequence of matter, and it also gets transported through matter. And because there is no matter, then there is no sound, and therefore it's not possible to listen to the Dhamma and to become enlightened. Why is Dhamma not available through mental transfer, through telepathy? I don't know. But we don't have a case, as far as I know, in our scriptures where the Buddha would teach through telepathy. You can hear about that kind of technique nowadays with some gurus in India, mostly in Hindu or let's say Brahmanic tradition, but not in Buddhism. In Buddhism, you do not get instruction through telepathy, through mental transfer, but you need to listen to the Dhamma by your ears. So for that reason, there is no way to actually achieve enlightenment without body. Is it clear? We still have Laura here. Probably not. Anybody else? If you have question, you can ask. Please, may I ask one question, but I'm afraid it's unrelated to the lecture. That's okay, no problem. I would like to know, what is Vimukti? I frequently hear this word here and there, like nowadays is Vimukti era. Vimukti. Mutti itself means liberation, and V means complete liberation, deep liberation. Okay, but we usually translate the word Vimutti as liberation, as freedom, attainment of freedom. And we use usually Vimutti in Buddhist tradition for Nibbana, for attainment of enlightenment. So if you achieve enlightenment, that achievement itself is called Vimutti, the liberation. But I would like to I would like to point to the interesting thing, to the richness of the word, because Vimutti, even in the scriptures, even in the context of meditation, has two very different levels. You can actually achieve liberation without enlightenment at all. Is that good? That actually is good, because that is on the way. So the Buddha in Satipatthana Sutta, the major discourse on meditation practice, provides an instruction on how to observe 16 mental states. So that's the foundation of mindfulness, on the mental states, 16 mental states. And one of these mental states is Vimutti, is the liberation, Savimutta, the mind that has liberation. And the commentaries clearly say that this is not a case when you achieved enlightenment. This is the case when you are detached. You are detached from everything in the world, which always includes your body and your mind. And thereby it includes your degrees, your possessions, your wife or husband, your skills, your memory, and everything else. So when you achieve this mental state, that means you clearly understand that everything, including yourself, that means the body, mind, skills, degrees, abilities, memories, and so on. When you achieve that full detachment, then you call that mental state Savimutta, or you can simplify it as Vimutti, liberation. The problem with this state is that it's temporary, because it's not enlightenment. The one that's permanent is enlightenment, but this one is temporary because it's just an attitude. It's an ephemeral, temporary attitude. And that's why we also have avimutta mental state. Avimutta means not liberated. So that's what happens after you get this liberated mind. Then you smell some delicious food, or you see a handsome man or a beautiful lady, and there you go. You are attached to the world again. And that's when you call it avimutta, not liberated. So the word vimutti or vimutta here is not necessarily always related to enlightenment, but it can be also a mental state that's on the way toward enlightenment. But most often it's used for enlightenment itself. So if this is era of Vimutti, then you probably heard this from some very free thinkers of Buddhism who suggest that actually today it is possible to achieve enlightenment. Because the Buddha, he said that the Buddha's teachings, even if the ladies, if the nuns follow the special 8 roles, which he then decided, and the ladies, the nuns agreed, even when the ladies follow these 8 special roles as nuns, the Buddha's teachings will be available for 1,000 years. And the Buddha said 1,000, not 5. The Buddha said 1,000. And the noble life, that means life as a monk or a nun, will be available for a long time. Now, how will we resolve that? Okay, the Buddha said 1,000, so we cannot do anything about that. The Buddha said 1,000, so it's 1,000. And now it's 2,500 years after the Buddha passed away. So how shall we resolve that? Well, we do have enlightened people today. That is 100% sure. But it's 1,000 years is gone. So was the Buddha wrong? And that's why I say there are free thinkers in Myanmar who suggest that actually the Buddha's teachings is clear and fully available for 500 years after the Buddha passed away. Then there is a 2,000 years period when it is not really so clear and available. And then after the 2,000 years, there's another 500 years when it is fully available and ready for enlightenment. And then there will be another 2,000 years when it is not available again. So those here who are coming from Burmese tradition, you have heard of 5,000 years, but that's what I actually just now explained. 500, 2,000, 500, 2,000. And this 500, now the second 500, that is what is called the Vimutti era. We do not have this counting, this idea of 500, 2,000, 500, 2,000 counting anywhere in the Pali scriptures, commentaries, or sub-commentaries. Nope. But Burmese people believe that. It makes sense. So that's why it's called that way. So we did actually see that during the first we would say probably the first 1,000 years after the Buddha's time, we saw quite a few arahants in our scriptures and in historical literature. And now we also see many enlightened people. So the 500 years after the Buddha's time and now the second 500 doesn't really work that exactly, but we can definitely theorize, and this is what's in the commentaries, that the highest level of enlightenment that would be possible gradually reduced during the 2,500 years. Okay, so first 500 you could become arahant with all psychic powers, second 500 arahant without psychic powers, the other 500 the third level of enlightenment. There are 4. The third level, and then the other 500 2, the second level, and then the other 500 you could become only a stream enter. That's the first level. And now we have the other 2,500, and again we are starting with the ability to become the full arahant with all psychic powers, and then you get other 500 that will be probably by now when no, maybe, well, who knows. So by this century or next, we'll probably see that people are not able to achieve the highest level of enlightenment called arahanthood with all psychic powers, and they can only become arahants, and then gradually it will deteriorate. That means the potential for enlightenment will deteriorate. So that is the meaning of Vimutti. Why in the Buddha's time there was a lot of people who were able to be enlightened? I have read some histories where people were converted in Sotapannas. Does it happen today? Yes, it definitely does not happen today. It's necessary to meditate, but there are cases when during Mahasi Sayadaw's meditation retreats and other retreats in those times, so that's about 100 years ago. About 100 years ago, we can read of a lot of meditation retreats and cases when great monks in Myanmar would teach Dhamma and the lay people would attain Nibbana within a few days, maybe 5 days, 10 days. They were meditating. They were meditating. But that would all support this idea of this 500 years counting. So because we would be now in this 500 years, it means the second 500 years of the 1,000 years availability for enlightenment, as the Buddha suggested, we can therefore see quite a few people in Myanmar achieving enlightenment 100 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. By now, you will still see, of course, those people alive, many of them, but you will see still many Burmese people meditating very hard, achieving enlightenment. Unfortunately, it seems that this teaching of enlightenment doesn't really get far away from Myanmar. It stays there. We can see a lot of reports or stories of enlightened monks in Thailand, tiny bit in Sri Lanka, but I am a little bit suspicious about Sri Lanka, so learn that about me. Doesn't mean that is right. And then we have, of course, many people around the world who try to meditate according to the Burmese method. Meditation from Myanmar has been applied in different countries. There are many monasteries, many meditation groups, movements all around the world, and there might be people who are enlightened. So we actually can hear of many people who believe to be enlightened or who behave or who look like or who perceive the world in the way how we understand an enlightened person would. Whether they are 100% enlightened, that probably would be a task for the Buddha to answer, not for us, but we can definitely assume and compare. Okay? And based on my assumption and comparison, yes, they are enlightened. So I would say yes, today we have a lot of people who are not enlightened, but they do not come, usually they do not, come on Facebook or YouTube and say, you know what, I'm this, I'm that. Usually they don't do that. So unless you are inside that bubble of the serious meditation practitioners, you will not know about that. Okay, so I think that was more than enough for today. It was a pleasure to share with you my knowledge, my experience, and I hope to see you all next week for our next session. We will have 2 more lessons, so I would like to invite you all to come in and enjoy the new knowledge. May you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you soon attain the eternal bliss of Nibbana.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much.